Okay, so here we are, partially done. I've inserted the tubes through the struts, put the rubbers on, and I always put the rubbers on the inside because typically when you put these on the outside they inevitably get scraped off and go missing. If you put them on the inside here, the struts stop them from coming off, so they never go missing. The things we've got to do now is we've got to put these little tiny grub screws in the holes here. We don't tighten those up just yet. We need to cyano these little end plugs into the ends, which you can see here, into the ends of the skids. Just a little tiny bit of super glue and glue those into place. And then we use these screws to bolt the struts to the underside of our frame. And then once we've bolted those in, we centre up the skid pipes and do up the grub screws. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of that. Okay, and there we have our undercarriage installed. We've put the grub screws in here to make sure these skid legs can't move around, and it's screwed in on the underside, 4 points with self-tapping screws. So that's the majority of our frame set completed. And we can now start looking at moving on to doing the back end of the model, fitting the boom and setting up the tail system and all that stuff. So that's what I'm going to move on to next. Okay, so here we have the majority of the components we need to build up our tail. There are some other parts, but these are the main pieces. We've got our pre-assembled tail gearbox, which of course we've got to take the screws out, Loctite them and then put them back in again. Pay particular attention to how much Loctite you use when you're doing these little tiny screws at the back here. You want only to use the tiniest amount of Loctite, otherwise you'll gummel this area up with Loctite and it will make the pitch slider sticky and you'll get a horrible tail response. Tail wag and all that kind of stuff. So you want to be really careful with how much Loctite you use. Really just a tiny weeny amount on these screws at the back here on the pitch slider. The basics of this part are we're going to install the tail gearbox onto the boom, thread the belt through, and then we'll be putting on the boom supports and the vertical and horizontal tail fin. And then installing that into the back of the model, and then we're pretty much done. And of course we've got to do the tail push rod, which I've got here as well, and the push rod guides. So that's kind of what's involved in this next piece. What's not in this picture are the vertical and horizontal stabilisers. I'll introduce those as we need them. We're going to need the vertical stabiliser quite quickly because it's part of the install for the tail gearbox. But first I'm going to work through this and Loctite everything, and then we'll come back and put the vertical stabiliser on and fit this onto the boom. Okay, so I've threaded the belt through the boom, and I'm now at the point where the boom end here, and this is just gently inserted, is to go in there like that. And what you'll notice is there is a hole. So the gearbox goes on the whole end of the boom, and this hole lines up with this hole here, and then there is a keyed plastic piece put here which bolts onto there and goes through that keyed plastic piece there, goes through the hole and through the hole in the boom and basically holds it all in position so the gearbox can't twist on the boom. So we need to push that all the way in and then line up the hole, and then we can install this piece and the vertical stabiliser, because the vertical stabiliser fits on that piece as well. Vertical stabiliser and that piece, screw it all on, and then that's our gearbox on the boom and in place, and the belt all the way threaded through. Okay, so I'm going to grab the vertical stabiliser and bolt that into place with this gearbox and insert. Okay, so there we have our tail gearbox installed. We'll just move it over here so you can see. Spin round. There's our screws going through the stabiliser into the tail gearbox, which has clamped that nice and firmly onto the boom, and then we have our belt sticking out the other end. Now at this point we want to insert the other various bits and pieces onto the boom before we start installing other stuff. So there are two pushrod guides which we just want to insert onto the boom, and there are also two servo holders which we also just want to slip onto the boom. And you may have to undo this top screw here just to get some there we go, one like that. I'll just do this one as well. And there we go, another one like that. And that just allows us to install this now into the back of the main frames without worrying about having to insert these pieces later on, so they need to go on now. So the next thing I'm going to do is insert this boom into the back of the frames, put the quarter twist into the belt, and that's the boom then installed into the frames, and we can start putting on the boom supports and that kind of stuff. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is put this onto the back of the frames. Okay, something I just want to quickly show you when you're inserting the boom into the back of the frames. There is a slot in the boom, and that needs to be horizontal and aligned like so. And if you actually look inside the back of the gearbox, down inside there, you can see that there are some little tabs which align with the slot in the boom and make sure that it can't twist. So we need to make sure that it does go in like that, with the slot aligned to those tabs, otherwise it won't push in. Okay, so there we have our boom installed, and I've done up these various button head screws and put some Loctite on them to tighten them in place, and you can see the belt there over the pulley, and you want to put enough tension on this belt that, you know, with a screwdriver it's quite difficult to push it over to make the belt meet the belt the other side. So there's enough tension on there that you can't quite, well, you can just about, with a fair bit of pressure, get the two sides of the belt to meet, but that's the kind of tension you want on there. You don't want it mega tight, you still want to have some flex in this belt here, but you know, just enough that they can't touch, that's all. Okay, so I don't know whether you can see that. I'll just show you there. Hopefully you can see the belt being pushed over there, but quite difficult to get it to actually meet the belt the other side. Okay, so the next thing is to put the boom supports and the horizontal stabiliser on. So here we have our horizontal stabiliser. This is the clamp that goes around the boom that the stabiliser bolts to with these screws, and then these ones go in the side and hold our boom support, which we have here, onto this horizontal fin assembly. And then at the other end there are some screws that are pre-installed into the frame, and you can see them down the bottom here. This is it here, this screw, and that's where the boom support goes at the other end. So I'm going to put all that on, and then we'll come back and you can have a look at it. Okay, so there we have our finished horizontal stabiliser. I've got one push rod support here behind it, and you can kind of see how it's gone together. Screw in the side here, no Loctite on this because it's just into plastic. The same for the screws up above, which are self-tappers, and then down the other end here, again this is just screwing into plastic, so no Loctite required, and there's your full boom brace up to the tail support at the back. So that's the boom installed, and the next thing we're going to do now is come back to working on the frames themselves. If I just bring this out a little bit here, we've got an obvious gap here where a main gear should be, and obviously we've got a main shaft and rotor head to install in the top here. So that's the next step, is putting the main gear in and the rotor head on the top here.